Welcome back, everybody. Today I'm going to be talking about my basic 24-hour experience with Chaos Zero Nightmare as of me playing and going through this video. And with this, I have a lot to talk about. I have some initial impressions, thoughts, feelings, and some feedback, both in terms of what I liked and didn't like about Chaos Zero Nightmare. But with this, I'm going to get into all this and more. Without further ado, though, let's get into it. So first and foremost, one of the standouts and something that I think is really important to talk about when it comes to Chaos Zero Nightmare is a bit of the change in perception that they originally had. Now, from someone or as someone that had originally followed Chaos Zero Nightmare, since I had obviously been aware of this game since Epic 7, or I guess the Smallgate publishing team had talked about this, I was cautiously optimistic about the game, but then initially I saw that there was some sort of hinting towards there being chibi, and honestly, for me personally, that's just not my personal vibe for an artistic design. But then as Chaos Zero Nightmare started releasing more information, and then once we got into the closed beta, and as you're seeing right now, the game is absolutely fantastic. Now, I do want to make make you guys very well aware and make it well known that despite there technically still being chibis in the game, I think they're actually handled in a really meaningfully good way. Now, what I mean by this is that despite the game otherwise from the menu, like other titles, looking mostly like a 2D or live 2D-esque game, there are still chibis, especially when you look at things like the combat of the game, but that's actually not even necessarily a bad thing. Now, I'll explain. I understand that in most cases, people don't like looking at the chibis because for whatever reason, it doesn't appeal or it takes away from the immersion, which is fine. That's great. But I actually think that this is the opposite for Chaos Zero Nightmare, where despite the fact that there is or are chibis, also, I just have to do a little bit of refreshing, I apologize. But as you'll see in a moment, despite there actually being chibis in the game, when you have auto and when you have all the different POVs or different illustration types all at the same time, like we bounce from a live 2D to a over the shoulder perspective to the technically chibi animation on screen. It's actually a very healthy balance where it feels like you keep altering your perspective or you enter different dimensions, which makes honestly the content both enjoyable but also very varied. It doesn't really feel like I get bored looking at the animations, as I can either look at the character casting the ability on the side, I can look at them casting it on, in the foreground, or I guess like the foreground or almost background of the game, or I can actually look at the illustrations of the cards or any of the animations whenever there's like a animation ultimate scene. Now, beyond this, and although I know you can't hear it, the audio in the game is also very, very good. And I don't just mean this from like, oh my god, the music is great. The sound effects and the horror and the atmosphere, this alongside the visuals, I should say more specifically, makes up one of the most chilling and honestly really uncomfortable experiences that I've had when it comes to trying to quote-unquote enjoy a gacha game, because I myself am not really someone that really fixates on or plays too much of the horror genre, which is really surprising because, again, for a game like Chaos Zero Nightmare, they do kind of balance it very well. There are these eldritch horror looking enemies, as you're seeing on screen right now, but at the same time, you'll have certain characters that look super happy-go-lucky, which makes things super cool. Now, in addition to this, and as you kind of saw from the gameplay there right now, the gameplay is technically auditable, but the gameplay itself is actually, I think, easily one of the most appealing parts of the game. Now, if you watched or if you didn't, I didn't actually enjoy the combat or the gameplay too much when I first, yesterday at this point, streamed the game, and I was more frustrated partly because of the fact that at launch there were a lot of disconnecting or lagging issues, which is whatever, and this alongside bugs are things that are obviously supposed to be or are going to be fixed in the future. That said, in terms of what I didn't really appreciate or I didn't like the most about the gameplay, I myself, though I understand this is more of a personal choice, I'm not really a fan of needless conversation or needless transition or needless dead space, dead air when it comes to action, story, or anything in between. Now, of course, this does mean, and as someone that honestly appreciated the more recent titles like Blue Protocol and Stellasora having AFK or auto comboing or very well done autoing systems, this for me felt a little bit weird when I came into Chaos Zero Nightmare, as the auto system is not terrible, but it's definitely not amazing. Now, I've heard the argument and the pushback towards this multiple times, where if you want a roguelike game to be easy or autoable, well, you're not really, staying true to the spirit of the roguelike, which, as I kind of processed and thought about more, I do think that's fair. However, I also think that there are certain activities that you'll just be doing, like talking to someone for the first time, or you'll be experiencing a cutscene for the first time. And though I understand the idea behind quote unquote like no skipping until after you've seen this for the first, or after you've experienced it for the first time, this still takes away from a lot of the experience or the enjoyment for me personally of the story, as where you would probably be skipping is through dozens of these side stories, systems, or missions or activities, all of which are not even really necessarily how should I say, optional, as a lot of these will give you rewards or EXP or actually contribute towards your account level, which of course then allows you to unlock other activities. Now, this small gripe aside, as I understand this is more of a personal preference for me personally, I think that the gameplay of the game is fantastic, excellent even, I'd say. The roguelike aspect of the game is very deep and rich, and for a lot of the people that have experienced, or I should say for a lot of people I've spoken to, and even for myself as I've experienced when experimenting with or going through the roguelike systems, this is a very challenging, fair, but also like very intriguing roguelike game. This isn't really your run-of-the-mill roguelike where all it is okay, you do this you do this roguelike run one time, you never have to do it again, and there is no real pushback on this. The roguelike system allows you to really strive for perfection in a different way, or through various different ways. Something that I've talked about frequently in the past actually is the fact that if you are someone that wants to, say, go through content like the roguelike chaos realm area, and you want to get the best Rinoa, you want to get the best Mika or anything like this, you can do that, especially if you feel that you are weaker or you're unable to clear the content at the time. That said, this is also something that I am a bit fearful of, as each run, as there is no auto accessible or no auto allowed, even if the auto system is technically quote unquote subpar or may lead to your death, there is just no auto allowed whatsoever when you're doing these roguelike systems or roguelike missions, which I think is something that may feel a bit tiresome or cumbersome for players, especially if you're trying to play this game more consistently or even daily. Now, I do also want to talk about the fact that in terms of the account or the character that I have right now, I am someone that has spent a bit, because I definitely did want to try out all the different characters, as there were many characters I was interested in, Rinoa being one of them. And with this, I have to say, I don't necessarily think that my experience my experience on this account is by any means free to play. And with this, I can only imagine that despite me being bad, certainly at roguelikes, I cannot imagine that the experience for a lot of players is very easygoing or casual, which to me may lead or to me I guess feels a little bit weird, because I would imagine that they would want to appeal to a wide audience with a game like this, as again, there are a lot of even casual type aspects of the game that are appreciable, like the Arc City and the ability to date or go on dates and build affinity with your favorite waifu and things of this nature. But as we continue on with the different systems, and as we continue on with the game throughout or into the future, the gameplay system of having a long or a rather long roguelike, if you're trying to push for a perfect run, does feel a little bit concerning, just because I can imagine that someone that's on day 300 of their account may not want to boot up, see that they've unlocked a new chaos realm, or they find that they need to do this in order to be stronger, assuming this is what the the end game looks like in any case, where they want to be stronger in the end game, or they want to be able to clear content faster, and they think to themselves, okay, well, now I have to dedicate the rest of like my night trying to fish for like the perfect Renoa or Haru run where I didn't have, you know, a random RNG spawn, or I rolled improperly on a dice, or I didn't get to remove the card that I wanted. All of this to say, I don't want to comment too much about the good, the bad, the ugly, or where the future of the gameplay is going. I personally have experienced and enjoyed the content of the gameplay, or rather the gameplay itself, quite a lot, especially when it comes to actually getting the characters that I enjoy, and especially after I got this guy here, Cassius, who I think a lot of people are a big fan of. The game has felt way more enjoyable and even more interesting, as even when I'm not progressing, just playing Cassius and his casino type gameplay is actually pretty enjoyable. Now, beyond the gameplay, by the way, this is so funny, I literally have been playing for like the entire day. In any case, moving forward beyond this though, I do want to talk about the gacha system in the game. Now, there's no secret, or there's no beating around the bush with this. This is a Hoyoverse 50-50 system. However, there is a guaranteed 100% pull rate, or a guaranteed pull rate on the limited weapon banner. And if you're curious, yes, there are weapons, quote unquote. In this case, they're known as partners. Now, as far as we can tell, the viability or how impactful some of these weapons are is still up for debate, as again, it's really difficult to gauge how good or how impactful these weapons will be when arguably in some cases you could just try and fish for better equipment, as we'll talk about later, or even just a better roguelike run. And with this, it's really difficult to say whether or not this is a problem, whether this is worth it, or if it feels like they're just trying to hide or kind of sweep under the rug the whole fact that they have a 50-50 system with their character banners, which I think a lot of people are not a fan of. But it is what it is. Gacha systems are a very, very touchy and controversial subject across the board when it comes to companies, the audience that consume it, and everything in between. It is what it is. I have my own personal take on it, but this gacha system exists the way it is. And in case you're curious for what it is, it's here, and well, whatever, it is what it is. Okay, moving along though, I do also want to include some thoughts about I guess my time playing the game, and also include a few tips and tricks when it comes to Chaos Zero Nightmare. Now, initially, I will say, and as I kind of alluded to earlier, my initial experience with this game was a bit buggy. I did experience a few of the disconnects or unable to continue through the content while I was on stream, which is unfortunate, but it is what it is. That said, overall, my experience, especially once I started to get or understand the combos, was much better and way more enjoyable. That said, something that I think feels a little bit frustrating, even from a more understanding, or trying to be more understanding towards not wanting to auto content in this game point of view, is that there are many enemies in this game, or I would say on average you are almost never fighting just one boss. A majority of the content that you're going to be fighting in this game is several enemies. Sometimes it's bosses that then summon more enemies, or it'll be like a stage that just has respawning ads for literally the entire fight, unless if you kill the boss. Now, that said, in terms of my experience, I haven't really had any problems with any of the systems or even the gacha rate, until it came to, well, trying to solve my biggest grievance, I think, with the game, which is that it doesn't feel like there are that many AoE options in order to clear through the game. Now, I do want to say, or I do want to preface this by saying, again, as someone that enjoys autoing, I understand that if something is automatically playing for you, it is what it is. You get up, you go get water, you go drink, you go use the bathroom, whatever. There's not really much that you can push back on, or like complaining about it when the game is literally playing for you. It is what it is. But especially when you have to manual like one of the longest pieces of content in this game, the fact that there are so many like encounters or events or boss fights or just fights in general where there are multiple enemies and you don't really have access or easy access to AoE damage dealing characters feels extremely frustrating at times. Now, I will admit, in most cases, this doesn't stop you from being able to clear in general, or this doesn't stop you from, you know, being able to progress as a whole. However, even when I'm just doing something like farming for a stage, this whole process takes even longer than you would imagine. Not because the dailies are particularly difficult, or clearing through or using your energy is supposed to be particularly difficult, but it's because, like, even in some of the content that you'll see, like whether it's farming for characters, farming for their growth materials, or farming for the weapon ascension materials, these are all multi-enemy stages or multiple enemy having stages. And even for like the most popular character that we have right now, or I should say easily one of the most, or going to be one of the most popular characters, who's the current limited character on banner right now, her auto, first and foremost, her auto feels absolutely terrible. And again, I already mentioned that auto doesn't really make sense for her. But even when you go to look at her potential kit, or like what you will have in her kit doesn't really AoE unless if you get to power charge. And even with this power charge ability, the whole kit itself kind of revolves around using her anchor shot, which then allows you to combo into power charge. But again, what you will in most cases just be doing is single targeting over and over and over, which again just adds to the overall fatigue of playing a game over and over, or more tediously, or more I guess less willingly, kind of, in a sense. As again, if you're just trying to get through and do your dailies, or just trying to get through and clear content, it can feel kind of cumbersome if you have to do it the most manual and annoying, or quote unquote annoying, or more lengthened or strung along way, as opposed to, well, just taking someone like in Epic 7, where you just use someone like Arbiter Vildred, you just take someone like Norma Vildred, or you take someone like a Free Spirit Tieria and just clear the stage. Now again, I know that comparison might be a little bit unfair, as again the games are kind of designed a bit differently. I would say actually way more than just kind of very differently designed. But even in terms of the entry or intro levels, it doesn't feel like it is super not free to play. It's not very casual friendly for people that just want to get through the content very quickly, be able to get to or hit the wall of like level 20, for instance, and just log off, because, well, you know, it's very rare to have players that want to play for, I don't know, something like 6 to 7 hours and spend a majority of that time single targeting every single enemy until they're gone. Now, I do also want to preface that I haven't been able to experience every single updated kit, as they really did overhaul like almost every character that we've seen from the closed beta, and that has completely thrown off a lot of my initial perceptions of characters. But as I've been experimenting and talking to other creators about it, I'm getting the hang of it a bit more, and my TLDR of a lot of the characters has kind of shifted slightly, but a lot of what I understand about the game is still relatively similar, and that's where I'd like to actually transition into the tips and tricks section. Now, if you didn't get, or if you couldn't tell from what I just mentioned, or from what I just described, one of the most important tips that I can recommend for you at the start of this game is to read. And I know that's really difficult for a lot of us, myself included. I am not excluding myself from this insult, but really, you need to read in this game. Like, not just read what the character does, what element they are, what label they have next to their name in terms of what their character is. This is a game that you really need to stop, read, and understand the kit for, because certain characters, especially when it comes to their abilities or how you may think of their kit flowing, just absolutely does not make sense unless if you sit down and really think about it. Now, this might be a turnoff for a lot of people, as I know this is a bit to ask for, especially from a gacha audience. But take Haru, for instance, who is again a character that likely a lot of people are going to gravitate towards or be interested in pulling for. Now, if you take a look at Haru in the default save data, you can see that she has a lot of options. She has a shield, she has a generic attack, she has a load of buffing capabilities. But even beyond this, if you're just starting the game for the first time, number one, you might not even know what the save data system is, and number two, you might not even know what any of these numbers are, or how they work, or what the interworkings of this is. However, if you take a base level Haru and play her, but then compare it to actually what they show you in the current event with Haru, it is just completely night and day. Now, to be clear, why this is so significant and why this feels so different or so impactful, and I want to really emphasize the reading in this game, is that this concept that they describe here is explaining how Haru is supposed to be played and how they decided to effectively get rid of all the trash or nonsensical or more fodder abilities. And upon doing so, they're able to actually create a very cohesive, or I guess maybe less so with this team, but especially in this team, but create like a very cohesive card cycling, card generating like loop where it's literally, okay, as opposed to before where Haru may on occasion be able to use her big abilities or use a lot of her DPS, this setup where they've perfectly tuned the Cassius, they perfectly tuned the Mika and the Haru together. This is a machine. Like the setup or the team that they have here, though obviously also high level, works super well with each other. It cycles through the deck. It allows you to increase the number or the amount of ability points or action points that you have access to, and it lets you constantly pull through the entire deck or search through the entire deck, get out Haru's highest damaging ability, gives her a bunch of buffs. Like again, some of her abilities will like give her the ability to buff her own ability or buff anchor shot specifically. And if not this, they also prioritize taking a lot of cards like anchor pointer here, which then allows you to tank anchor shot from any point or any part of your deck and put it straight into your hand again. Now, if this is, or if you've kind of lost yourself in this conversation, my point that I'm trying to get here is that reading will or ignoring your ability or ignoring your abilities or ignoring reading in this game will basically make it so that Haru looks like the absolute worst character in the entire world, because if you actually do auto with her or if you don't read her kit or abilities, you're just going to continuously shield yourself, use lift anchor or charge energy when you have no abilities available, or you're just going to raw dog use something like power charge and nothing will come from it. However, if you read, and this is the case with other characters too, even like a character like Cassius, you're able to take away some of the worst cards. Like you don't need all these damage cards. You don't need all these random abilities that don't really add towards his ability to cycle through cards quickly. And again, if you end up reading and you invest the time into developing a good deck, you can have one of the most crazy, impactful, unique characters that I've ever seen in a gacha game, honestly. And this is something that, again, sorry for the long tangent, really stems from just reading. Now, on that note, I do really also want to emphasize that though the auto is technically serviceable in terms of being able to kill or get through content, there are a few things that you should know about it. Now, I mentioned the fact that it's suboptimal. This is mostly because the content or I guess teams that you're going to bring in most content will normally have something like a buffer, or it'll have something like a defensive unit, as a lot of people will be using characters like Mika or even Cassius. However, if you're trying to use these characters on auto, a lot of times what you'll end up happening, or what you'll end up happening rather, is that Mika or Cassius will end up cycling into each other or infinitely healing and buffing each other. But then your main DPS, unless if they are extremely straightforward and have no buffing themselves, they'll never actually end up dealing damage. You'll just keep buffing yourself, healing yourself, keeping or prolonging the fight into infinity. And until you RNG run or RNG get a run where all you have is just basic attack cards, your run will be bricked, which is annoying to say the least. So with this, if you are someone that's looking into autos, I haven't necessarily figured out if this is even viable, but the autoing had gotten so annoying, especially when I had used a character like Nia, when it comes to their what they're I guess assigned or what they're going to do in most cases, unless you get really lucky. But as a result, I have almost thought about just running 3 DPS raw to see if like the fact that you would just use attack cards is better than trying to semi buff yourself up, and rather than extending the fights longer, you just raw dog or you brute force DPS in order to actually clear through content in a timely fashion. And again, since this isn't like Epic 7 or other fights where you take damage or you have permanent damage beyond the initial stage, this may end up being something that people do in the future. But again, don't hold me to this. I'm going to look into it a bit more. Now, finally, the other thing in regards to teams, the final thing I want to talk about is actually in terms of the roles and the kind of the setup for a lot of teams. Now, most, if not almost all teams currently will function so long as they have some sort of buffing, healing, and card cycling or generation. Now, again, I've already teased about and talked a lot of this through with Cassius being super cool, him allowing you to, for instance, get a specific card that makes Haru strong or that can do a lot of damage with Haru. But as a caveat to this, you should know that some characters have extremely high skill costs that are just too high. And unless if you have a perfect run where you are able to reduce the cost of some of your cards, or you are able to reduce some of the cost of the card cycling or the buffing skills to be near or at zero, not every single team will actually be able to fulfill or be able to handle a card cycling team. So just keep this in mind as you continue building up your decks or as you continue progressing through the game. This game really is a reactive play with what you have type title. Now, in terms of the gacha, I want to revisit this for another moment and as we talk about characters, because as you've probably noticed, there are a couple characters that end up being really strong right now that people have talked about. Mei Lin, for instance, alongside Kalipe, and if I'm not mistaken, also Kairon, are very powerful characters depending on how familiar you are with the game or what you're, I guess, most comfortable with. But if you're curious about the reroll process as a whole, from what I've seen and timed, this will take you about 20 minutes. However, from my experience through this as well, it is also worth noting that there's another set of pulls technically further from the first initial point where you would want to reroll. But of course, this is an extra set of time, and if you're already going to spend something like 30 or 40 minutes per reroll, it may not even feel worth it to you at that point. Though, of course, I'm not going to recommend towards or against rerolling. I understand that a lot of people see this game for what it is. If you enjoy the rerolling process, if you find yourself wanting to reroll for a specific S rank because you love them, by all means, feel free to do so. I have 3 final tips left. The first is that reset is at 2 p.m. EST if you're curious, which is kind of an odd time, especially if you guys are familiar with Epic 7 or Smilegate titles, where they're usually reset at like the crack of dawn for America, which is around like 5 to 6 a.m. EST, or technically, I guess, in the middle of the night for PST. But finally, I do also want to, or rather, right before finally, I do also want to say that if you're trying to progress or go through the game, looking to buff a single character during a chaos run will actually be way more helpful than you think. As again, stacking a really strong character to beat content is just the name of the game. However, in order to do so, it does feel like sometimes what you'll need to do is actually just sit here, farm over and over. And again, I understand it's kind of long, but you'll have to just sit here, see how far you can get through the content, try to get a run where you get rid of or eliminate all the useless cards, and instead try to find cards that are very beneficial or that buff or allow you to do whatever your character's power fantasy is. On a real final note for this video, I do want to say that though a lot of these shiny S ranks or these these 5-star characters are going to be what people want, keep in mind that a lot of the 4-stars in this game are also really good. Now, although I'm not entirely sure about Nia, as I've seen people kind of go 50-50 on whether or not she's good or bad or worse or good, etc. Whatever. I have definitely heard that characters like Cassius and Mika, though Cassius is technically still a bit nerfed, he is quite usable. He's quite nice in terms of card generating. Mika is the GOAT when it comes to healing and being a support in general. And in addition to this, if you have access, well, I shouldn't even say if you have access, everyone should have access to Tressa. She's also a very good Agni based DPS, and with how often and how cheap some of her abilities are, she's also a DPS that you may want to invest in, especially if you aren't someone that likes the complexity or the what's coming in the future, I guess, when it comes to building a character like Haru or any of the S ranks thereon. Now, all of this to say, guys, honestly, I've had a blast with Chaos Zero Nightmare. There are plenty of caveats, there are plenty of things that I still think that they need to work on, whether it's bugs, whether it's honestly making sure that the content isn't too hard as well. As again, though I understand people appreciate a challenge, you do also have to keep in mind or remember that the people that are trying to play this game do also have lives, so it is what it is. But In any case, guys, that's going to be it for today's video. I do really enjoy a lot of Chaos Zero Nightmare. I think the characters look great. There are so many characters, honestly, that I think are either interesting in concept or design, and that's a huge plus for me. But in any case, that's going to be it for today's video. I'll see you all in the next one. Stay safe, stay healthy. Good night.